Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Gutierrez. I'm a graduate and former teaching assistant for the Master of Science in Narrative Medicine program at Columbia. But I'm currently a first-year medical student at Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University, where I also teach a seminar series on structural racism and with a little bit of critical race theory. My academic work up to today has focused a lot on conceptualizations of social difference within the medical institution, and I hope for a career in psychiatry, and to orient eventually my clinical work towards addressing the psychological and physiological effects of oppression, structural racism, and minority stress, and also towards resilience and resistance as therapeutic goals of psychotherapy. So today my presentation is called White Coats for Black Lives, Medical Students, Marginalized Communities, and the Medical Institution. So today though, I'll discuss the medical student organization of which I am a member, White Coats for Black Lives, a medical student activist group that serves as a branch of the Black Lives Matter movement. Its birth was precipitated by the increase in media reporting police violence and brutality against African Americans in 2014. The organization has three distinct goals. 1, raise awareness of racism as a public health concern. 2, end racial discrimination in medical care. And 3, prepare future physicians to be advocates for racial justice. Recognizing the lived experience and identities of those who have built this student activist group, I acknowledge that I necessarily enjoy the privileges of being a cisgender Asian male. I cannot know what it is like to be African American, nor is there one unified African American experience. But I recognize that our histories entangle themselves as people of color, who together strive for health justice and racial justice by addressing the racism of and in medicine. Given that the theme of the conference is arts and the health humanities, I will examine as a kind of primary text the medical student die-in, which has become a hallmark modality of political demonstration within White Coats for Black Lives. I will examine the performative features of the medical student die-in as liberation art and demonstrate how these features have socio-political import with regards to how medical students today conceptualize their relationship to marginalized communities, social justice, and activism. Ultimately, I will argue that health justice for marginalized populations depends upon students who may not only see the structures that produce the unconscious conditions for injustice, but also understand how to navigate the inherent relation of enmity that obtains within counter-hegemonic work as people of color within a system that was not designed for or by them. Although there is heterogeneity to how the medical student die-in is executed, there are some common features. Students and some faculty and staff will wear their white lab coats and lie down on the floor of a public space on campus. Sometimes signs will be held with various facts or statistics about police brutality. The sight of bodies upon the campus is alarming, particularly because it violates some of the features that constitute the space: sterility, organization, and of course, professionalism. The demonstration appears as an intrusion upon these principles and disrupts a space that is not designed to accommodate bodies in such a way, a kind of intrusion from within. In their book, Towards Psychologies of Liberation, Drs. Mary Watkins and Helene Schulman assert, most liberation arts projects arise in environments of amnesia, where past situations of oppression and violence are silenced in school curricula and public life, yet affect the landscape in myriad ways that are covered over with hypocrisy. Thus, the work of liberation arts involves an interruption of dominant narratives, an awakening of silences, and articulation of the modes of forgetfulness that prevent dialogue. One of the modes of forgetfulness that this demonstration articulates is the artificiality of space and what medicine sees as its purview. The many issues of social justice, here in this case, the specific issue of police violence that medical students are calling attention towards, occur within the very neighborhoods in which hospitals and medicine situate themselves. By bringing attention to the outside from within, one then begins to question the boundaries of what medicine deems is its concern, in other words, its purview. Watkins and Schulman list several features of liberatory arts, and one is particularly salient to this example. Liberatory arts are rupturing. The work is innovative and interruptive of commonly held narratives, and breaking open taken for granted unities and questioning old understandings, silences and assumptions for the purpose of challenging and naming forms of amnesia. Medical students who are themselves entrenched within a system of hierarchy, status, and power rarely feel a sense of volition within the medical environment, and are all too frequently silenced themselves with regards to socio-ethical viewpoints. There is a gauntlet of Eurocentric nostalgia for professional standards, neoliberal ideals, and the Bavarian iron cage of rationality that stand in the way of socio-political involvement. Medical students are unconsciously told, if not explicitly, to maintain distance to these very marginalized communities with whom they wish to work. Despite the fact that medicine in the United States and also in Europe has been complicit in the production of race motivated by racism through its economic dependence on chattel slavery in the antebellum South, medicine continues to obviate itself of a need to reveal how such history persists in its very structure today, and instead substitutes it with a pristine, white, apolitical, and acultural floor that may only be interrupted by bodies of color. It is this modality of institutional amnesia and apathy that White Coats for Black Lives is challenging. The spatial situating of the die-in is designed in a way that there is no possibility of apathy. Members of White Coats for Black Lives position themselves in a way that interrupts and intrudes upon bystanders' optic and physical geography, becoming something to which one must react. The immediacy of the body as a history of violence made manifest is forced into one's consideration. One must care or not care, navigate or avoid. The artistic methodology of implication elicits a Levinasian hesitation and self-reflection in the bystander. Am I responsible? Are we responsible? This naming of the circumstances is essential to the critical practice of social engagement. Marxist philosopher of education Paulo Freire famously asserted that oppression through education is predicated upon differential access or claim to what is the case. Therefore, the essence of critical practice is first to reclaim that ability and then reveal that what is the case is a side of mediation. Oppressive reality, though, absorbs those within it and thereby acts to submerge human beings' consciousness. Functionally, oppression is domesticating. One must emerge from it and turn upon it. This can be done only by means of praxis, reflection, and action upon the world in order to transform it. This critical act of naming may only appear as a violent act by virtue of the domesticating function of oppressive reality, a lack of examination of what is the case. This act that ruptures and decenters is true engagement with the structures and institutions that unconsciously format and maintain what is the case. But to present an alternative to what is the case is a dangerous proposition. When presented across a difference in power, especially from one who occupies a lower hierarchical stratum. For to posit an alternative circumstance, a circumstance that interpolates victims, will necessarily implicate those within power and trigger a dangerous reflex within white consciousness that journalist and author Ta-Nehisi Coates has called a socialization of white apologetics, from which we can derive both repertory work, but also perceived aggression and antagonism. In reference to Freire's concept of critical consciousness, philosopher of liberation Enrique Dussel asserted that the presentation of critical practice to those of the dominant system necessarily appears as untruth, heresy, or irrationality by virtue of its revelation of the deficiencies within the given system. Here's a quote from Enrique Dussel: "The existence of a victim is always a material refutation or falsification of the truth of the system that produces such victims. The truth of the dominant system appears then at this moment as untruth, in Adorno's terms. The existence of the victim becomes a criterion of falsification." Understanding this is absolutely essential to liberatory work, that the system and institution of medicine historically was never for people of color and those at the margins. But, and this too is important, it may be a source of liberation if one proceeds with knowledge of this unconscious foundation to medicine. In other words, one cannot begin to disentangle the remnants of racism as the father of race from medicine without first acknowledging its genealogy and also the mechanisms in place that have allowed its latent persistence today, i.e. its racial immune system. What I hope to have shown is that in any articulation of the circumstances as they really are will necessarily be disruptive and perceived as an act of blaming by virtue of our embeddedness within the circumstances. Yet as students from White Coats for Black Lives have shown, that although we must all realize that we are all already implicated, the material moment of critically conscious work is when we move forward in solidarity with that knowledge towards the goal of racial justice. The die-in draws attention to reality making and reality mediation in order to encourage us to re-examine our relationship to racial justice as healthcare practitioners. What this all signals is that for those who wish to work with marginalized populations, one must recalibrate the geography of their work. It is nonsensical that we are told by our medical institutions to care for the margins, but not to care about the structures that create the margin. It is that mentality that has allowed us to perceive ourselves as immune from social responsibility. I am reacting to the prevalence of programs for the urban underserved, minority health, and care of the marginalized that have persisted alongside the racial injustices that White Coats for Black Lives is now challenging. We do not need more students interested in working with marginalized communities. We cannot allow such service learning programs and fetishistic models of care to continue to abstract marginalized communities from their socio-historical milieu. Namely, that medicine as an institution was a primary mechanism for the enforcement of race. Proceeding with this knowledge when undergoing work in solidarity with marginalized communities through grassroots work would recalibrate our locus of power and destabilize the notion that our presence anywhere is necessarily good or beneficial. It is this notion that is one of the most pervasive institutional inheritances of medicine's racist history. Ultimately, as White Coats for Black Lives has shown, one must be willing to see, cite, and summon the circumstances in order to even begin to address the structures that produce, promote, police, and perpetuate the conditions of injustice within which health would take place. For many of us, we are color beneath white coats upon white spaces. Elsewhere within here, as feminist scholar Trinity Minha famously said, the medical student dying is the death of a profession that has predicated itself upon difference and the racial other. Thus, lament not the ivory tower, but rather that one mistook for ivory what are forgotten bones. Thank you.